Hey guys, hope you guys are all doing well. Welcome back to another video. In this video, I thought I'd show you guys how to work with the animation system in Unity 6. If you have a background with Unity 5, then it's pretty familiar. It seems to work pretty much the same as Unity 5. But this video is aimed more towards people who don't have any experience using the animation system in Unity. So for those that are relatively new to Unity, this video should help you get up to speed with the animation system and how it works, or at least how I use it. Um, so the animation system is a pretty complex system. There's a lot you can do with it. I'm not really super advanced myself with the animation system, but I do know enough where I can pass on some of my knowledge to people out there that are just getting started. Okay, so I'm going to get started here. So I have a project here that's currently opened, and this is a 2D game. I believe I mentioned that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a character for my game. It's a Psy Warrior, and I'm going to show you guys how I set up the animations and how I configure the animations so they're ready to be transitioned between one animation to another. I'm not actually going to be doing any code in this video. I'm just going to be basically just showing you guys the animation system and how I personally configure it. Okay. Um, so let's go ahead here. So I'm going to go into my game assets folder. I'm going to go into artwork, enemies, and whoops, wrong one, Psy Warrior. Okay. So you'll see here that I currently have different sprite sheets set up. So I have Psy Fighter, which has several animations on it. It has my idle frames, my running frames, and my attack frames. And then I have another sheet here, which is the dash. It's like a dashing animation. And then I have my walking animation, which I believe, no, yeah, that's a separate one. So that's the run animation. Yeah, so I have three different sprite sheets here that I'm currently working with. So these sprite sheets have already been configured in the inspector. So you'll see here that sprite modes have been set to multiple because we are working with multiple um, sprites on a single sheet. So I set the sprite mode to multiple. I set the pixels per unit to 1.8. The max size I set to 1024. What else? Filter mode I set that to point. So if you're working with pixel art, you should set the filter mode to point. And compression is set to none. Yeah, so that's how I configured the settings for this character. So when you set the sprite mode to multiple, you can actually edit the sprites. Where is the open sprite editor? There we go. So here in the sprite editor, you can set the actual cell size. So in my case here, it is 92 by 66. I believe that's how I set it up. You can also set your pivot points for each sprite. So you'll see here I have a custom pivot, and I configured my pivot points. Right, so basically when my character is idling, it's going to idle from this pivot point here. You can change the pivot point if you want. You can change it around depending on what your needs are, but for me, this is how I configured mine. All right, and you'll notice that my other animations have pivot points in a different position. So typically I like to set the pivot points to the center of mass for a character, which is usually kind of like the center of the body. So you'll notice that my pivot points for each animation correspond to the center of mass. All right, so let me close that down. Discard. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up the first animation. So the first animation I want to set up is the idle animation. That's typically the entry point for my characters. So basically they start in an idle position or an idle animation, and then from there they can transition into a walking animation, into an attack animation, into a death animation. You get the picture, right? So in this case here, what I want to do is I want to grab the first 4 frames from this sprite sheet. This is the idle animation. I'm going to grab these first 4 frames. I'm going to drag them into the inspector window or into the scene window. right here. So as soon as I do that, Unity is going to prompt me to save this animation. So under my game assets folder, I have an animations folder. I'm going to create a new folder. This is my Warrior. And then here I'm going to name this animation Warrior idle. All right, so Warrior idle, hit save. Okay, so you'll see here that it created a new game object. I'm just going to quickly rename it. F2, this is going to be Warrior. And I'm going to quickly drag it into my group of enemies. So right there, and then I'm going to assign it to the enemies layer. And I believe this one needs to have what did I set these ones to? So let's set this one to 3, order in layer 3. Okay, so you see here I have my Warrior game object, and it currently has a sprite renderer assigned to it and an animator component. Okay, so that's the first animation set up on this game object. So here we have, I have my animation tab open and I have my animator tab open. So under the animator tab, you can see all the different states of animations that are currently configured. So right now I have my Warrior idle. So this is actually my entry state. And then I'm going to quickly set up my any state. I'm going to make a transition here. I'm also going to set up an integer parameter. So I'm going to call this integer parameter anim state. So this is what's going to control the transitions between one animation and another. So basically when you create an integer parameter, you can give it a name and then you can define like an integer, which is going to switch between animations, right? So I'll show you a little bit more of this in a second. Let me just quickly configure my other two animations and then I'll show you some of the settings here for the transitions. So let me make sure I have my characters selected and the hierarchy. I'm going to go to animation. So actually one thing that I want to do here is I want to set this to 60 FPS. So samples should be set to 60. I'm going to take the first frame and I'm going to quickly duplicate it to be the last frame. I find that this creates a smoother transition when the animation loops. So that's just kind of like a little trick that you can do to create a smoother transition for when the animation loops from when it reaches the end and then it loops back to the beginning, right? And then here I'm going to grab all of my frames. I'm going to drag them out to about, let's drag them out to about 40 frames. All right, so I'm going to hit play. Okay, and yeah, I think that looks pretty good for an idle animation. Okay. So you want to make sure that you're always aiming for 60 FPS, right? So just make sure you set those samples to 60. And then basically you can drag the frames around to make the animation slower or faster. So if I were to drag this back down, let me just show you here. And I hit play, you'll see that the idle animation is like super fast, and I don't want that. So I'm going to drag this back out to, did I have it at 40 or 45? Let's try 45. 45 seems a bit too slow. Let's try 40. Yeah, 40 looks better. So I'll leave that one at 40 frames. Right, so the course of this animation is going to run over 40 frames, and then it's going to loop back to the beginning and play over again, right? So currently it's not really set to loop. That's one of the settings that we're going to have to turn on. When you play it in the inspector, when I use the play option here, it automatically loops. But actually, hold on a sec. Does it loop by default? Actually, yeah, it does loop by default. Okay, so the looping actually does occur by default. But I'll show you where the loop option is in a second, so you can turn that off if you don't need it to loop. Okay, so let's create my last two animations. So I have Side Warrior Idle. So if I want to add a new animation to this character, under the animation tab, we can select this drop-down menu here. We can select create new clip. So Unity is going to prompt me to save the new clip. So I'm going to call this Psy Warrior Walk. Hit save. So now we need the walking animation. So I have this one set up in a separate sprite sheet. So I'm going to click on here. I'm going to expand all the sprites. I'm going to select them all and I'm going to drag them into this window. Okay, so I've dragged all those sprites into my animation window. So we see that the samples here are already set to 60. So if I were to hit play in the inspector, you'll see that she's walking super fast. So I don't want that. I want her to walk a little bit slower or at a more moderate pace. So I'm going to select all the frames and drag them out again. Let's try 50 frames. Let's preview it. Okay, so I actually forgot to do the copy and paste of the first frame. So actually, before I do that, so let me just show you what this looks like right now. You'll see that once it reaches the end of the animation and it loops back to the first frame, there's a little bit of a jitter. So let me hit play. So yeah, so you'll notice there that there's a little bit of a jitter, right? I don't know why Unity does that, but it does. You'd think it'd be smart enough not to do that, but Unity is not the greatest program on on the face of the planet, but it has its shortcomings. So I'm gonna hit copy. I'm gonna hit paste. I'm gonna drag this back out to 50 frames. Now let's hit play. All right, so you'll see here that it transitions a lot smoother now from the last frame to the first. Right, you don't see that that glitter or whatever, that little bit, that glitch that occurs. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna leave that to 50 frames. It doesn't look too bad. Let me hit stop here. So I want to add one more animation. Actually, I might need two more animations. So my Sci Fighter. Actually, I need to add. I need to add the running. Am I gonna add the running animation, or should I just go into the dash animation? You know what? I'm going to add the running animation just in case I need it. So that goes from frame, that starts at frame 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, no, frame 4. Yeah, so it goes from frame 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, so to frame 11. Okay, so 4 to 11. All right. So I'm going to select my Sci Warrior game object. I'm going to create new clip. And this one is going to be called Sci Warrior Run. Let's hit save. And we're going to go to 4 to 11. Let's grab these guys in here. Samples are set to 60. That looks good. So now we have the running animation. Let's quickly copy and paste the first frame to the last frame or beyond the last frame. And then let's drag this guy out to about 35 frames. Okay, doesn't look too bad. Maybe I might want to go a little bit quicker. After all, she is running. Yeah, I think maybe I'll leave it at 30. That's 30 frames. Actually, let's put it at 35. Nah, 30. All right, so I'm going to leave that at 30 frames. Okay, so we have the running animation, and then what's the other one I need to add? The dash. So I need to do the dash animation next. So let's add a new one here. Let's do Sci Warrior Dash. Save. Let's get the dash animation frames. Drag them into here. I'm not sure if this one needs to loop, but I'm going to copy and paste the first frame anyways. Okay, so that's going way too fast. Let's drag this out to about maybe 25 frames. No, it needs to go faster than that because she's in a dash state. And it needs to go faster than that. Maybe 10 frames should be good. Let's try 7. Okay, let's try 7. All right, so I'm going to leave that one as 7, and I need to set up my final animation, which is going to be my attack animation. So that one should start from frame 12. Yeah, frame 12 to frame 15. So select my character, create new clip, Side Warrior attack, hit save. Let's go 12 to 15. Okay, so we got the attack animation happening. So right now it's probably a little bit too fast. Let's get this stretched out to about 20. So this animation is not going to loop, so I'm not going to copy and paste the first frame. It's just going to reach the end, and then it's going to transition back to an idle state. Okay, so we do that. Yeah, let's leave it 20 frames for now. Okay, so you'll see here that all of my animations have been created. So if I go back to my animator now, my animator window, you'll see here that we have new animations that have been created, right? So we have idle, which is our entry point. Then we have walk, we have run, we have dash, and we have attack. Okay, now in order to transition between different animations, the way I like to do it is I like to transition everything from the any state. So what I do is I right click, I make a transition to each of my animations. Okay. And then if I select this line for one of these transitions, you'll see here that we get settings under the inspector window. So what I like to do here is I like to have a one-to-one transition. I don't want any like soft transitions created between my animations. I just want it to be like a hard switch from one animation to another. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check off fixed duration. I'm going to check off can transition to self. I'm going to set transition duration to 0. And you'll see here that when we change these settings, you'll notice that the transition inspector here, where you can actually visualize the transition changes. So if I were to set this back to 0.25, you'll see here that it actually creates kind of, I guess, like a duration between the current animation to the next animation. And I don't want any duration at all, right? But you can see here, you can kind of visualize how the duration is going to work. If I set that to 0, there's no duration between one transition to another. It's just instantaneous, right? So that's pretty much how I want my animations to work. Depending on how you're designing your characters, you might want to have some kind of transition from one animation to another. Can transition to self, that's something else that you might need for your for your characters or for whatever your circumstances are. That might be beneficial to you, but for me it's not. Yeah, so again, transition duration set to 0. Can transition to self, I have that set to off, and yeah, and everything else, fixed duration is off, transition duration 0. All right, so that's pretty much all disabled. And then what I can do here is I can set my condition. I can define what my condition is going to be in order for my character to transition into this state, into this idle state. So for the idle state, I typically like to set it to 0. So you'll see here that we have our anim state, which I set up earlier, which is one of the parameters that I set up here. So there's 4 different parameters that you can configure. You can do a float, an integer, a boolean, or a trigger. I typically just like to use integer. That one works perfectly fine for my needs. So for this demonstration, I'm just working with an integer parameter. Feel free to explore the other ones on your own, but for this example here, I'm just going to cover the integer parameter. So I've named my integer parameter anim state. So here under conditions, anim state equals 0. That will allow me to transition to the idle state when anim state equals 0. And then if I go to my next transition, I'm going to do all the same settings. And then here, I'm going to set anim state equals 1. Right, so when I set anim state to equal 1, it's going to transition into the walk animation, right? So I'm just going to continue doing this for the rest of my animations or the rest of my transitions. This one's going to equal 2. This one's going to equal 3. And this one's going to equal 4. All right, good. Yep, so that's it. So all of my transitions have now been set up. So again, typically you're always going to have like an entry point. And I usually like to have my default entry animation set to my idle animation. And then from there, I can switch to any other animation state using this any state, I guess, mechanism, right? Exit state, I don't really typically use that. To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever used the exit state. It might be beneficial in some cases. You're just going to have to explore that and see if it's something that you can use. But I'm not. Does this actually create a transition? Create state, empty, create substate machine. Right. So yeah, I've never actually. I guess maybe you can transition from here to an exit state. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just going to ignore the exit state for this tutorial. Okay, so that's I think that pretty much covers it. That's pretty much how I set up my animations and how I set up each animation and then how I set up my transitions. So I think I can actually test this here if I go, let's go animator. If I play this, hold on a sec. Let's go here. No, that stops it. I do believe there was a way to test this in here. The animator, if I set this to 1, and then I go back to animation, no. Play. I could have sworn there was a way to test this in the inspector window, or maybe it's in the game window. Let's see, somebody hit play. So I actually have all my other characters here. Can I zoom this up? Yes, I can. Let me select my Psy Warrior. Let me go to Animator. Let me set this to 1. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so once you're in game mode, like once you're actually previewing your game, you can quickly test each animation state by just swapping out the integer number here. So there's the dash, there's the attack, and then, no, that's the attack, that's the last one, right? Go back to 0, so we got the idle animation there, the walk animation, the running animation, the dash animation, and the attack animation. Cool. All right, so that's all I'm going to cover in this video here. So I hope you guys found this video useful. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. I think in the next video, I'll show you guys how I actually manage the animations through code through C#. Yeah, so that'll be in an upcoming video. But for this video here, I just want to show you guys the animation system in Unity and how I use it for my needs for 2D game development, right? So guys, I hope you guys found the video useful. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. I would appreciate your support, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.